The Border Management Authority claiming that hundreds of children were rescued from a human trafficking ring, possibly at the Beitbridge border post this past weekend. While in Boksburg, also this week, 40 foreign nationals were found crammed in a house by police who they say were also victims of human trafficking. Well, the Human Sciences Research Council's Professor Frankel is our guest tonight to talk about the prevalence of human trafficking in this country. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time. Do we underestimate the frequency, if I may use that word, of human trafficking in this country?
Well, I'd go further than say that we underestimate it. I think we virtually ignore it. I found in the work that I've done, if you ask people, do you believe there's any human trafficking in this country, the answer is generally no. Human trafficking, they say, occurs in India, occurs in Southeast Asia, but it doesn't occur in this country. That is blatantly untrue. It does occur in South Africa with considerable frequency. We don't have, unfortunately, the exact statistics, but we do know that it is substantial. And this is not only, of course, child trafficking, it's sex trafficking, it's labor trafficking, it's organ trafficking. It has many different manifestations. It's there, and from what has been done over the course of the last few years, not very much has been achieved in terms of reducing numbers.
I wonder how much of our perceptions or misconceptions have to do with how much we have been able to be aware of the problem and indeed respond, because when you look at what happened in Boksburg, these foreign nationals, dozens of them, were found crammed in a residential home in Boksburg, and we often think that perhaps it happens Hollywood style, where people are snatched from their homes, from the side of the street, crammed into containers and shipped off abroad. But that's not always the case. It can happen right down the door from your apartment in some cases.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a recent study which has come out, published by the American government, which identifies what they call as hotspots for trafficking. Obviously, Johannesburg is one, but I would go further than that. The fact of the matter is that trafficking, whether it's sex or child trafficking or labor trafficking, can occur within a central business district. It can occur in a residential area. It, in fact, is all over the place. When it comes to the kinds of trafficking, particularly child trafficking, which we have, there are different patterns, some of which are associated with what happened in the course of the last few weeks. You get what is called trans-frontier trafficking, where children from other parts of Africa, particularly Southern Africa, are brought illegally into South Africa across the border. And that has been very prevalent in the course of the last few years. But you also get trafficking within South Africa itself, where children are taken, let's say, from a rural area to an urban area. There are also some very rare cases of children who have been brought into South Africa from further north in Africa, say Zambia or Zimbabwe, and then resold, that is the correct word, back across the frontier. So there are all kinds of things which are going on and all kinds of different patterns, which makes child trafficking a very complex phenomenon.
So in a country like South Africa, when one is trafficked, be it children who are taken to be used as laborers illegally, be it people who are trafficked to be exploited or used as sex slaves, drawn into sex work against their will, etc., is that sort of thing done, for want of a better phrase, by order? So whoever is basically going to traffic you is doing it to meet a request by a criminal on the other end who said, for example, I need, 5 children or 5 young girls, 5 young boys for X purpose.
Yeah, no, that definitely does occur, particularly in the field of labor trafficking. You know that in South Africa we have approximately 500,000 children, that is people, adolescents, even younger children, who are not actually in school and who are actually amenable, let's put it like that, susceptible to being trafficked. So traffickers can either approach these young people directly, many of whom are open to being trafficked because they're unemployed, they're in conditions of poverty, they're trying to improve their existence, or in other cases, yes, you can get what you might call, I suppose, trafficking to order. This occurs very frequently in the labor sector, where, for example, informal business in townships requires children to do menial work, and in those cases, yes, you find a relationship between the traffickers and the people who ultimately exploit them. Another form of trafficking, which I think is very important to mention, is what might be called police complicity trafficking. The police are fairly well aware of the problem that we have with trafficking in South Africa, and some of them have certainly made considerable efforts to combat this terrible crime, but there are others who sometimes collude with the traffickers themselves in providing young girls, for example, for brothels or children for purposes of labor. So again, a number of complex things going on: children to order, police involvement, and above all, I mean, I think the main problem in South Africa, amongst many others, is that there is very little knowledge about trafficking. People are not very sensitive to the fact that it exists. We don't have what is called a reporting culture, which means that a lot of trafficking actually goes on. People see it happening, but it's not reported to the police. And in some cases, even when it is reported, not terribly much is done.
How do we change that, sir?
That's a very complex one. Look, there seems to me to be two things that need to be done here which are critically important. Firstly, as far as the police are concerned, they need far more training when it comes to trafficking. We need also to root out corruption and complicity in the police force, which is being done to a degree. So training and, let's say, expulsion of delinquent police. But on the other side, the biggest thing is to educate the public. And educating the public means quite simply making them aware that trafficking does take place. When they see trafficking occurring or where they suspect trafficking taking place, to refer it to the police or to the National Trafficking Hotline. And in this context, of course, there's great responsibility loaded onto people who work with children. Teachers in schools need to know more about trafficking. Social development workers need to know more about trafficking, and so forth and so on. In other words, there's room for a national education program if we can get it off the ground.
This may be a slightly complex question to deal with as well. I wanted to ask you about the proportion of victims who are found versus those who are never found. And I caveat that by going back to what you said earlier, the fact that we don't know the true magnitude of the problem. We know it exists and that it perhaps is growing, but we don't actually have accurate enough stats to go on. But do we know how many are actually ever recovered and recovered safely?
Well, look, there are different ways of looking at this. It has been reported, not everybody would agree with this, but it has been reported that there are roughly 200 to 250,000 trafficking cases in South Africa at any one time. Normally, outside South Africa, if you get that number of cases, a quarter of them will be ones which involve children. So we're talking about a lot of children here. Other than that, of course, our level of kidnapping has been increasing. We have the highest level of kidnapping ever, 2,000 kidnappings every month now, some of which are for trafficking purposes. And in addition, we have approximately 3,000 to 5,000 missing children. And by missing children, I mean children who have literally disappeared. there is one organization in South Africa who works with us, and it's referring here to young people who have literally disappeared. We don't know where they've gone. We don't know whether they're dead or alive. And that again makes computing the figures very, very difficult. I think you also need to know that many children are coming across in groups, individual small groups. These might be children from Zimbabwe or Zambia, for example, who are coming to look for members of their family already in South Africa. They may be coming to look for their own opportunities. So again, the situation is extremely complex and there's no exactitude in numbers.
Good to speak to you, Professor Philip Frankel. Really great to have your time.